It is February 1940. The air in Harbin, Manchuria does not just bite, it consumes. It is 30 degrees below zero, a cold so absolute that it feels like the atmosphere itself has ceased to function. You are shivering, but not because you are a criminal. Yesterday you were a shopkeeper, a teacher, a soldier. Today that identity has been administratively deleted. You look at your captors expecting hatred, but they do not look at you with anger. They do not look at you as a person at all. They look at you as inventory. To them, you are a maruta, a log of wood, an item to be processed, cataloged, and eventually utilized. You breathe in, you expect the stagnant air of a dungeon, but the environment is terrifyingly clean. It smells of industrial disinfectant and fresh pine. The only sound is the rhythmic, heavy crunch of military boots on packed snow. You look up, searching for a guard, but the man observing you through the glass does not wear a military uniform. He wears a pristine white coat. He is not a jailer, he is a doctor, a graduate of one of the most prestigious universities in the world. The realization hits you colder than the wind. You are not in a prison, you are in a laboratory. For the next few years, your existence will be reduced to variables and statistics. You are the raw material for the most precise, cold-blooded scientific machine in human history. Welcome to Pingfang. When you picture a monster, cinema has trained you to look for a cackling madman in a dark basement. You imagine a chaotic, rogue element defying the laws of nature. That is a comfortable lie. The reality of Unit 731 is infinitely worse because it was organized. This was not a hidden dungeon run by a few sadists. This was a massive, state-sponsored industrial complex. It possessed a hierarchy, a bureaucracy, and an annual budget that rivaled major sectors of the American Manhattan Project. The men running it were not outcasts, they were the elite of the medical establishment. We need to distinguish the motivation here. Unlike other regimes whose atrocities were often fueled by visceral emotion, the scientists of Unit 731 operated with a terrifying detachment. They didn't destroy lives out of anger, they did it out of scientific curiosity. To the researchers in Harbin, the infliction of suffering wasn't punishment, it was calibration. This psychological dissociation is where the term maruta comes from. In Japanese, it means log. The facility's official cover story was that it was a lumber mill. Consequently, the human beings trapped inside became the lumber. This euphemism wasn't a joke. It was a necessary psychological shield. It allowed a father, a husband, a doctor to walk into a lab, methodically dismantle the biology of a living human being, and tell himself he was simply chopping wood. It was just another day at the office. At the center of this web sits Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii. To his peers, he was a prodigy, brilliant, charismatic, and commanding, but beneath the intellect lay a void, a complete absence of empathy. While the rest of the world looked at the Geneva Protocol of 1925 as a moral line in the sand, Ishii saw it as an advertisement. His logic was twisted but undeniably pragmatic. If the world powers had agreed to ban biological weapons, it must be because those weapons were incredibly effective. He didn't want to avoid them, he wanted to master them. But he couldn't build his machine in Tokyo. He needed a place where the eyes of the international community couldn't see. He needed a shadow zone. Enter Manchuria. As occupied territory, it offered two critical resources: absolute secrecy and an endless supply of test subjects. Civilians could be swept up off the streets and vanished without a trace. Most disturbing of all is the scale of the endorsement. This wasn't a back-alley operation. It was established by specific decree. The funding flowed from the very top of the empire, granting Ishii the resources to build a fortress. To the outside world, this facility was given a name so boring, so clinically benign that no one would look twice. They called it the Department of Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification. It was the perfect bureaucratic camouflage for a factory of death. If you were a pilot flying over Harbin in 1940 looking down at the Earth, you wouldn't see a prison camp. You would see a thriving, modern metropolis. The Pingfang complex was a sprawling 6-square-kilometer city. It had its own airfield, a dedicated railway line, a Shinto shrine, and even a stadium for athletic events. It looked like civilization. But this infrastructure was a shell. At the geographic heart of this complex sat buildings 7 and 8, the Rosa. This was the special prison block. It was a fortress within a fortress, constructed of reinforced concrete so thick it was virtually soundproof. The cells were not designed for rehabilitation, they were designed for observation. Each cell featured a viewing port, allowing the researchers to treat human desperation like a specimen in a jar. Surrounding the Rosa was an industrial capacity that rivals modern pharmaceutical companies, but they weren't manufacturing medicine. The facility was designed to mass-produce pathogens on a scale the world had never seen. They had large-scale fermenters designed to churn out biological agents by the ton. The production quota wasn't measured in vials, it was measured in kilograms. But having the weapon wasn't enough, they needed a delivery system. And here, the engineering is as impressive as it is diabolical. Standard metal casings wouldn't work, the heat of an explosion would neutralize the biological payload. So the engineers of Unit 731 developed a solution: porcelain. They created the Uji bomb, a ceramic shell filled with vectors. It was designed to shatter upon impact like a flower vase, releasing its living payload without harming it. They had turned disease into an artillery shell. The system was complete, now they just needed to test it. Now we must step inside the operating room, and we must lower our voices. What happens here is difficult to comprehend, not just because of the nature of the act, but because of the rationale behind it. When the surgeons of Unit 731 prepared a log for surgical intervention, they made a specific medical decision: no sedation. This wasn't sadism, it was in their minds rigorous science. They believed that anesthetics disrupted the body's natural physiological responses. They worried that pain relief would introduce a variable that could skew the data. They wanted the results to be pure. So, the subject is restrained. The doctors engage in casual conversation about dinner or the war while systematically conducting invasive procedures on a fully conscious human being. The distress of the subject is ignored, it is simply background noise in the pursuit of data. Outside the laboratory walls, the horror took a different form. During the brutal Manchurian winters, subjects were marched out into the snow. Their limbs were exposed and doused repeatedly with water to accelerate the freezing process. The researchers waited. They weren't looking for shivering, they were looking for a solid state. The test for readiness was auditory. A guard would strike the frozen limb with a baton. The experiment only proceeded when the sound produced was not the dull thud of flesh but the hard, hollow crack of wood. They would then drag the subjects back inside to study rewarming techniques. They tested everything: open fire, blankets, friction. Through this agonizing trial and error, they discovered that the traditional method, vigorously rubbing the frozen area, was catastrophic. It caused irreversible damage to the tissue. They found that the only effective method was immersion in water heated to exactly 37 to 40 degrees Celsius. It is a terrifying paradox. If you are treated for severe frostbite in a modern hospital today, the protocol saving your fingers was likely codified here in hell. In the basement, others faced the vacuum. To simulate high-altitude conditions for pilots, subjects were placed inside a pressure chamber. The heavy iron door was sealed. The researchers stood at the window, clipboards in hand, and began to pump out the oxygen. Inside, the subject fights for breath that isn't there. As the pressure gauge climbs, the laws of physics turn against the human body. The researchers did not stop when the subject lost consciousness. They continued to lower the pressure until the internal damage was incompatible with life. You are no longer a soldier, you are a parent, and you are not alone. Clutched tight against your chest is your youngest child. You have been moved from the cells to a new room. It is sterile, bright, and silent. You are placed inside a glass-walled chamber. It looks like a greenhouse, but nothing grows here. You press your hand against the glass. On the other side, the men in white coats are watching. They are whispering, adjusting valves, checking their stopwatches. You don't know what they are testing. But they aren't testing the room, they are testing you. A hiss fills the chamber, the environment begins to become hostile, the air quality begins to degrade rapidly. Panic sets in, every instinct in your body screams for self-preservation. You want to escape the danger to find a pocket of safety. The men outside lean in, they are betting on your biology. They have a hypothesis. When pushed to the absolute brink of survival, will the subject prioritize its own life over its offspring? Will the parent use the child to save themselves? It is a question only a monster would ask, and they are waiting for you to answer it. The atmosphere becomes unbearable, but you do not drop the bundle in your arms, you do not use your child to escape the floor. Instead, you curl your body around the child, you create a shield with your own flesh. You bury your face in the child's neck, shielding them from the harsh reality of the room. You take the burden so the child does not have to. You hold on until the darkness takes you both. Outside the glass, the experiment ends. A researcher picks up a clipboard. He does not weep, he does not look away in shame. He simply writes down a single observation, a cold sentence that sums up the entirety of your sacrifice. Maternal instinct persists despite extreme stimuli. That sentence is the true horror, your love, your sacrifice, your death reduced to a data point. August 1945, the game is over. The mushroom clouds have bloomed over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the Soviet Red Army is thundering across the Manchurian border. Shiro Ishii knows his time is up. He issues a final, frantic order to his staff: leave no trace. The facility is rigged with explosives. The prisoners who are still alive are processed one last time to ensure no witnesses remain. The evidence is destroyed. The doctors shed their white coats, slip into civilian clothes, and melt back into the population of a defeated Japan. Then the Americans arrive. General Douglas MacArthur and the U.S. occupation forces land with a mandate to rebuild and to prosecute. They begin hunting for war criminals. But when intelligence officers stumble upon the rumors of Pingfeng, they don't find a crime scene. They find leverage. They realize that Ishii is sitting on a goldmine, thousands of pages of data on biological warfare, frostbite, and pathogen delivery. Data that no Western nation has, data that cannot be ethically obtained. And the Cold War is starting. The Americans are terrified that this information will fall into the hands of the Soviets. So a meeting takes place. It is not an interrogation, it is a negotiation. The United States government makes a calculation. They decide that the scientific value of the data outweighs the moral cost of justice. They strike what history will call the devil's bargain. In exchange for the microfilm, the slides, and the notebooks detailing the suffering of thousands of Marutas, Shiro Ishii and his entire staff are granted full immunity. Read that again, full immunity. There is no Nuremberg trial for the butchers of Harbin, no hangman's noose, no prison cell. The files are shipped to Fort Detrick, Maryland, classified top secret and buried. And the men who conducted these experiments, they didn't flee to Argentina, they didn't hide in caves. They went back to work. Because of their expertise, they were welcomed back into society with open arms. They became the deans of Japan's most prestigious medical schools. They became senior executives at major pharmaceutical companies. They lived long, wealthy, respected lives. And when they died in warm beds surrounded by family, having never spent a single day in handcuffs for what they did. We are left, finally, with the most uncomfortable truth of all. The legacy of Unit 731 is not just in the past, it is in our textbooks. If you are rescued from a freezing mountain today, the doctors who treat you will use specific rewarming protocols. They know exactly how to save your limbs. They possess this knowledge because 70 years ago, a scientist in Harbin watched a human being's arm turn to ice and timed how long it took to die. We are living beneficiaries of a blood-stained inheritance. We use data that was purchased with the souls of the innocent. It forces us to ask a question with no easy answer. Can knowledge ever be separated from the method used to obtain it? For decades, you were not allowed to ask this question. The United States government kept the files of Unit 731 classified top secret. It wasn't until the 1990s, half a century later, that the full scope of the atrocity was dragged into the light. For 50 years, the ghosts of Pingfang screamed into a void created by political convenience. They stand today as a hollow reminder of what happens when science is divorced from morality. History is often written by the victors, but as the story of Unit 731 proves, sometimes the victors are just as guilty as the defeated. Subscribe to the Scarlet Archives to uncover the chapters they tried to burn.